Hey, everybody. Welcome to this month's episode of Don't Get Rusty. Glad to be here with you. As you can see, this month's topic is the cross-country factor, or the XC factor, playing, of course, on that X Factor show, honing your talent for cross-country flying. And let's just go right here. Let's just jump right in with some of the basics. Of course, just right off the bat, just make sure you know your controls. If you've been here a bunch of times, we appreciate it, and just bear with us. But if you are on a computer and you're using the attendee control panel for a computer, make sure that you go ahead and look for the little, if you want to ask a question, that is, look for the little bubble that's got the question mark in it, type in your question, and then make sure that you hit that send button. If you're on a tablet, similar idea, look for the little question mark, notice the question versus anything else. Whoops, let me go back one. And then type in your question in the box and click the send button. And then that way we will get to see it, and then somebody will do our best to respond. Lots of you folks ask a ton of questions, and so we do the best we can to respond, but it's just we get so many, which is awesome because we have such a huge audience that anyway, we just want to make sure that we can do the best we can, but just we'll do what we can. All right, hey, my name is Chris Moser, Senior Director of Flight Training Education here at AOPA. I am a CFI, and I work here to support CFIs in flight schools. And, of course, joining me, as always, Dan Justman. Say hello, Dan.
Hello, how's everybody doing today? Happy to be joining again. Getting to be a regular here. I hope this sticks. I love doing Don't Get Rusty. This is a blast. It's fun talking about flying for sure. I get to support the Flight Training Initiative, working with Chris, Stephen here, and also the Rusty Pilots Initiative and the Flying Club's Initiative to Instrument Rated Private Pilot. Never get to fly as much as I'd like I imagine a lot of our audience does well, but happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. And then go ahead. We also are joined, as always, in the background, ever hidden until we get 1 million subs. Then we'll see his face. Stephen Stroder. Hey, Stephen, say hello.
Hello, Stephen.
And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm the coordinator with Flight Training Initiative, so I get to work in kind of all the different departments we do here at You Can Fly at AOPA. Primarily I work with Chris and Dan, so I work on our annual survey, producing this webinar, and a variety of other projects around the building.
Cool. And then I know one more person that's probably not going to come on air this time at least, but we've got somebody else helping us behind the scenes, which is Chris Horwath. So thanks, Chris, for joining us. And we'll probably get you up on the thing in the near future. Let's do this. Dan, you want to take over and tell us a little bit about our sponsors?
Absolutely. First of all, just want to start by thanking the Boeing family of companies, Jeppesen, ForeFlight, Boeing, of course, for their generous support of the You Can Fly programs, Flight Training Initiative. They are making it possible for us to be here with you today. Thank you, Boeing family of companies. Appreciate you.
Awesome. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit about ForeFlight today. Go ahead.
That's right. And also, just want to put a little shout out to who we work for, the AOPA Foundation. So we are able to put on programs like this and all of the programs that are created in the You Can Fly group, and our initiatives is donor funded. So not a single dollar comes from member dues from AOPA. We certainly are affiliated with the organization, but we appreciate all the donations. If you'd like to support aviation, pass on your legacy, please visit aopafoundation.org for more information. We're grateful for all that help us make this possible.
Cool. And actually, one more thing. I just saw somebody, Scott on there mentioned, he goes, hey, wanted to know how many questions were in a ton of questions, as I was saying at the beginning that we get so many. And I believe it's 2,000 questions are in a ton of questions. Just go ahead.
That makes perfect sense. I love your quick math there. Well done, Chris. So quick reminders before we dive in. Yes, if you have registered for the webinar here today, you can get wings credit. Hopefully you've signed up with your FAAsafety.gov email address. If you've done that, there's nothing more you need to do. We've got it. We'll take care of that. Stephen will get it filed with the FAA, and you'll see that credit showing up shortly. If you're not sure if you use the right email address, please email us with that email address at ftinitiative@aopa.org. So flight training, ftinitiative@aopa.org, and we'll make sure that that credit is submitted to the FAA. This webinar is recorded, so for those that are watching after the fact, you've already got there, but just if you guys want to go back and look at it at some point, it will be hosted, recorded and hosted on the AOPA Pilot video channel for YouTube, and under the Don't Get Rusty Webinars playlist. You can also find it at aopa.org. So that's today's webinar and just about all the other webinars that we've got in the library. So great resources to help you and your flying.
Awesome. And hey, we got a question from Stevie B out west there in Oregon, asking, is there wings credit for this webinar? And of course, we've already just mentioned that. Yes, there is wings credit, just with the email that Dan described, and we will remind you of that later. Thanks, Stevie B.
Perfect timing.
All right. Hey, Stephen, you found a really cool trivia for today in history. So why don't you tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, if anybody hasn't heard of it from before, on this day in 1969, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and was able to broadcast his immortal words about being one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. Surprise.
All right. Very cool. I can't believe it's been, what is that? That's been a while. I can't do the math.
I can't do the math on that one.
How many years? It's what, 40, 50, almost 50, 60 years, something like that. So that's crazy to think about. All right. Hey, let's go ahead and what are we going to do today? And I already saw somebody mentioning some things, and I see questions already popping in. But today what we're going to do is talk about sort of, again, we're making the assumption that most of the folks in the audience are certificated pilots. We're going to talk about more cross-country tips, just some recommendations, things. And we also solicited questions from you the last time. And so I made sure to incorporate pretty much all of those into the presentation today in some form or another. So I did mention, I saw somebody mention they were looking forward to learning how to do a navlog. Unfortunately, that would be the entire webinar if I were to explain that. So we're going to have to leave that one to your CFI to help you with. But I tell you what, if you hit us up, we will be glad to send you some resources. And in fact, I mean, there's a perfect opportunity if you're queuing that up. If you are looking for how to do a navlog, check out Rod Machado's Private Pilot Handbook. He has a whole description, a whole chapter on just how to do that. But there's lots of videos online, and then of course your CFI will help you with that too. Or you can also give us a call here at AOPA, 1-800-USA-AOPA. All right, so we're going to talk today about, as you can see, some general, like what cross-country flying is, just very quickly, because I just thought we'd talk about the definition very briefly. We're going to talk about some aspects of pre-flight planning and some recommendations there. I found some great articles, and there is a handout. So check out the handout. And yes, somebody asked about the slide deck. I believe Stephen will make that available via a PDF, so you can get that. But we're going to talk, I found this article on the 3 F's, as in Foxtrots, of navigation planning. And there's another bonus one too that's on there. We're going to talk a little bit about just some airspace. We have talked in detail about airspace over the past few episodes, so I'm not really going to go in depth into that other than some general recommendations when you're planning your cross country. We're going to talk, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about how to remember those VFR weather minimums. So there's something I do when I present the Rusty Pilots course when I do those, and I'm going to take some time to do that. There's a link to a video about that one as well. Weather analysis, we had some questions, and then in-flight pro tips, just some things that through my own experience and other people I've spoken with. And I know, I can't believe we're going to say it, but flight following is going to be at the end there, and then also using your piloting command authority. So let's get to this.
Here comes the questions. You said flight following.
Oh no. All right, so if we would, let's go ahead and take a look at our poll. Stephen, if you'd launch that. And the question is, what defines a cross-country flight? So this is a bit of a quiz here, and see what you think. Is it A, flying and landing from point to point? B, flying, I think I meant flying more than 50 nautical miles from your departure. My fault on that. Flying and landing more than 50 nautical miles from your departure. So it's just flying and landing versus flying more than 50 from your departure. Depends on what you're doing. And then E, nothing defines me or my flying. What do you think, Dan? What do you think people might be saying here?
Well, I did have the ability to look at this question yesterday, and I'm happy to report that my answer technically was correct, because I was looking at it from, depends on from what perspective you're looking. So I don't want to spoil it for anyone, because I am definitely biased to giving the answer that I know is correct. So I would say maybe as a tip to those, it's not as specific as you may think.
Fair enough. And it looks like we've got about 65% of people participating. So maybe we'll just give it another couple of seconds here or longer and see how many people will answer that. And yeah, it's this is an interesting one, because there are multiple definitions of what a cross country is, depending on what it is
you're doing. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and we got 70% there. Let's go ahead and close the poll and see our results. And as we can see, 69% of people are saying it's C, flying and landing more than 50 nautical miles from departure. And actually, there's really no wrong answer necessarily here. And then we had about 12%. So both tied for A and B, flying and landing from point to point or flying at more than 50. And then as you can see, 7% depends. And of course, as always, my 1% out there, sometimes too, nothing defines me or my flying. Those are always my favorite answers.
I think that's Steven.
It probably is. He's always the one doing it. At least somebody's doing it. So which defines a cross-country flight? Well, the FAA, when you look in 61.1, defines cross-country as flying and landing from point to point. So anytime you take off and land somewhere else, that's considered a cross-country. Now, what do most people think of? They think of C, which is what the audience here thought, and is not surprising, because when we're talking about logging time for your private pilot or even your commercial, to log that time, you need to land more than 50 nautical miles from your departures. That's purely for training. But when it comes to cross country in general, it's just taking off and landing somewhere else. The B one is, even though I missed that at thing in there, that really gets into like for your ATP. If you're working towards your ATP, all you have to do is fly 50 nautical miles away, or I think it's more than 50, and fly back. You don't even have to land, and you can count that as cross-country time towards your ATP rating. And then so really, I guess kind of D, and I know Dan, that's kind of what you were saying is D, depends on what you're trying to do, right? Depends on what you're working towards. So that's it. So let's go ahead and we got that one closed up. Hey, look, is that Steven? Are you on camera? Remember, 1 million subs, we'll see Steven's face.
We're almost there. What are we at?
Yeah, we're getting super close.
We're knocking on the door.
14,000. We're almost at 1 million.
I love it.
So what sort of cross-country flying are we talking about? That's exactly what I just described in 61.1. And really, the reason I even put this on there was because we had some folks asking, how far should you go? And I know, Dan, you've done some cross-country flying too when you were working in our outreach department. But it really comes down to, when you say, like, it's how far are you comfortable going?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then of course, what you might want to do is then try to stretch it a little bit. So take how far you're comfortable and confident. And then there has been a Steven sighting. He looked very heroic, I have to say, in that one too.
Did.
Yeah. And so somebody's asking right there, see, what's appropriate to log as cross country? Well, again, it depends on what you're trying to do. So if you're working towards that private, I'd have to go back and double check my regs, but it's like the commercial. I believe it also works for the instrument. You want to be doing that more than 50 nautical mile. In the rating that you're going for, it will tell you what the log as. And in fact, I think it's all in 61.1, and in that definition, it specified what it was. If you finish those ratings and you're working towards that ATP, it might be a good idea to have been keeping track of anytime you flew more than 50 nautical miles away. So it really just depends. So that's the basic deal there. So what to do. So yeah, once you have these ratings and you're kind of done with that training part, anytime you land point to point. So I actually, in my logbook, I've got two categories there. I've got one that says more than 50 nautical mile cross country, and then just all cross country. So if I fly from Frederick over to, say, Martinsburg, which is only like 25 miles away, I can log that as my all cross country, but not obviously my 50 nautical mile cross country. And then there is an exception in Hawaii, that is correct, depending on where you are. So check your training, check with your CFI for any exceptions like that. The other thing is, if you're deciding you want to go a little longer, maybe Oshkosh is coming up here next week and you're flying out there, maybe take somebody experienced with you to help you with that. So that's certainly a recommendation to help you when you're going to start stretching beyond those limits that you might normally do it. Okay. Now, for the pre-flight planning, I know somebody already asked, like, how do you do the nav log? I said that would be the entire webinar if we were to do that. And so there's lots of resources for that. Like I said, you can hit us up and I'll be glad to send you some recommendations. But we know that manual process that you learn using your E6B, using your plotter, using paper charts, that's definitely something you want to learn in training. But when it comes down to finishing your training and actually like doing it in real life, I have to say that using a computer or an electronic flight bag, that by far to me is better. It's faster. You don't have to get up 3 hours before your flight, in the morning to do your pre-flight planning. I remember doing that for my check ride because I didn't think to ask the examiner if I could just do it the night before, and then just update my weather the next day for our actual flight in the afternoon. So use the computers. And so there are online planners, and in fact, on the handout, I put a bunch of links to the AOPA's flight planner. I think there's SkyVector, and I just pulled out some of them. I by no means think that's an exhaustive list. And I also put some links to some of the more popular electronic flight bags that are out there, the software that you might use on a tablet, like an iPad or something like that. And of course, one of our sponsors is ForeFlight, and so that's a great one as well. So use those. Here's the reason I say that. It's like you want to learn those fundamentals because you want to understand how that works. So you've learned that during your training. But with using the electronic flight bag, perfect example, I remember doing my instrument rating, putting out all that information, calculating everything out for my instrument cross country, and then getting down to the run-up area. I get my clearance for the flight you're actually going to take, and you just do your best to guess what it's going to be, and then you get a clearance that's nothing like what you planned. So now your entire cross-country flight planning is out the window. Yeah. And so I literally remember saying to my instructor, I'm like, what was the point of doing that? Like it doesn't, it's no good now, and I don't have time to recalculate everything now. But with an electronic flight bag, I can very quickly just go in, reroute the flight, hit it, and then I can tell, do I have enough fuel? Am I all good to go? So they are just incredibly valuable. So using those, I think, is well worth the money spent on them. And I believe there's even one that might be very inexpensive or free, if I'm not mistaken. I just don't remember which one that is. So hold off on that question. Yes, and so somebody's asking, could the Navlog idea be a possible future webinar? We can certainly look at that. So let us know if that's something you'd like to see. Know or determine your aircraft performance. So big things here is make sure that you know twofold here. I would say that number one, go to the airplane flight manual, the POH, look up your performance, calculate it out, but also know experience. So for example, for me, I can go to the table and figure out, let's say I'm flying a 172 and figure out my exact fuel burn, but I also know from experience that I can be very conservative and say $9 or $10, $9 or $10. Sorry, $9 or I wish it was $9 or $10 an hour. 9 or 10 gallons per hour of fuel burn is going to be a nice, safe estimate for doing that. So know from experience what your airplane actually does and how it performs. So combine those two things. That's kind of that more advanced when it comes to the cross-country planning, is bringing that part into it. And the other thing too, and I think I will mention this later, is knowing to kind of having a standard procedure that you use. And I believe I'll talk about that one a little bit later.
Quick question.
Here's one. Go ahead. Yeah.
So this one came up. We were talking about EFB. I totally agree. For situational awareness, there's absolutely nothing better, but you got to have the fundamentals to learn. But the question that comes up all the time was, all right, I need an iPad or I need a new iPad. Do I still need an iPad with cellular capabilities?
Good question. So
thought I'd bring that up. Yeah. 2
or 3 answers to that one. So one, personally, here's my I have an iPad, and it's right over here. It's in this bag right here. But I get the Wi-Fi only ones, and the reason that I do that is because I have 2 of the little GPS. I have a little Bad Elf GPS as my backup, and then I've got a Stratus that I use so I can get ADS-B information in, and so that has the GPS information built into it. So I just sync it to that, and I have my Bad Elf as my backup in case that were to go down. So I at least have GPS information. So that's what I do. So if you're going to do Wi-Fi only, you need to have a plan for getting that GPS information.
Right.
Or you could get the cell-enabled tablet, right? You can do that, and then you've got 2 choices. You can either get that one and just not have an active cell plan, because that cell chip that's in it will get the GPS data from it. But of course, you won't get any data in or anything like that. Or you can, of course, pay for the plan and have a cell plan. So that's up to you. But there's 3 options there for what you want to do. Good question. All right. On the bottom of this slide here too, one thing I wanted to mention was, I know that this was a question. I think I asked our pilot information center if they still get calls about this. They said it's kind of quieted down since they introduced the ICAO flight plan, I don't know, a year or 2 ago. You need to know your aircraft profile codes, and somebody in our questions coming up when they submitted them, they asked this one: how do we get those ICAO aircraft profile codes? So I asked our pilot information center, and I found a couple of resources. I think it's an article from AOPA on the handout, and there's also the FAA's website where it's got all the codes there as well. But when I asked the pilot information center, they said, just 2 examples off the top of their head, is the AOPA flight planner, which I've got a picture of right here, has a thing where it will help you determine what your code is. It gives a description of what it is. And then also ForeFlight does the same thing. Generally speaking, if you are Yes, and I can review those 3 options of the iPad. But generally speaking, if you are renting an airplane, the place you rent it from or the school or the club, they probably already know the code, so get it from them. So like here at AOPA, we've got a couple of 172s and things like that, and so they just tell us what the codes are for that equipment. If you own the aircraft, you just have to do that research one time and you're good to go. And otherwise, you just need to ask and try to get help. But so like I said, the Pilot Information Center said these are pretty helpful for people to get the proper codes. Those 3 iPad options, again, you could go Wi-Fi only. But if you get Wi-Fi only, you need an outside GPS that's going to like a Bluetooth GPS of some sort, whether it's a Stratus or a Sentry or whatever those units are that do ADS-B, or at least something like a Bad Alf. I just happen to know that brand name off the top of my head. That is just a GPS unit that will sync up to your iPad and give you that. Otherwise, you need the one with the cell chip, whether you have a plan or not, so you can get that GPS information. Okay. Now, this was an interesting article. There is a link in the handout, and I know somebody's asking for a link to the handout, so it should be available in the, and maybe one of you guys, maybe Steven can help out there. It should be available in the menu there, but obviously you can email us at ftinitiative at aopa.org, and we can get the TO. Plus, we'll post it with the YouTube video when it gets up in a few days. But this article's in there, the 3 F's of navigation planning. And I thought this was interesting. When you're doing this real world cross-country planning, consider the 3 F's: field, fuel, and FBO. So the field, is the runway long enough for what you want to do? And is also, are you comfortable going to that one? How many runways does it have? Specifically, are there crossing runways that could help you avoid having to deal with a cross one, let's say? For the fuel, is there fuel available? What are the hours that it's available? What's the cost? You can find these things in AOPA's airport directory, for instance. You can also get some of that information. A lot of times in your electronic flight bag, it'll be there, or just even go to the chart supplement, the little green book, the chart supplement, and then you get the airport's phone number and give them a call to find out what the cost might be. So a lot of that information is available in these online planners, though, or the EFP. And then the FBO. Does the FBO have what you need? Are they going to be open when you get there? Are there fees? I know there was a thing we just got here at AOPA. They're pushing really hard because there are some airports and FBOs that are charging really high fees. So you want to be aware of those so you maybe don't go there. Do they have the services that you're going to need? And are they going to be open when you arrive? Do they have parking or hangar space? What are the fees for that? And then do they have a decent reputation? I have to say the AOPA airport directory is pretty good. It provides those FBOs and provides little reviews, like online reviews.
Very thorough resource, absolutely. And not just the stuff about the FBO and those, but things in the area, restaurants, hotels, things to do, like it is a tremendous resource. There's tons and tons of information in there that's constantly updated. So great resource. For sure.
And before I hit that post tie down part, I know somebody asked why those ICAO codes. We've got a student pilot online there. And so why the ICAO codes? Because now when you file a flight plan, we use all ICAO flight plans. And so you need those codes to file that for when you're flying. So that's why you need to know that. So once you know your airplane, you get those down, save them. I've got them saved, and I've actually stuck them in my iPad. So I've got that saved in there. It's actually in my ForeFlight. The codes are there for the aircraft that we've got. So that way I always know and I can find them. And in fact, a lot of times you can program them into your flight planning software and then it'll just remember them. So the next time you go to file a flight plan, you're good to go. All right, post tie down. Here's a key one. I know this happened to me one time. We got stuck in Charleston, West Virginia. We had a mechanical issue and had to leave the airplane there. Is there lodging nearby? So how close is the hotel? It might be one thing to go to an airport that's near where you want to go, but if there's no lodging nearby for you to stay, that may not work for you unless you're like our good friend Steve Bateman, who was on, I think it was it last month or the month before, talking about Tailwheel. He just takes a tent with him all the time when he does these kind of trips. How about transportation? Is there a courtesy car or rental cars available? Is there a hotel shuttle? But remember, those may have limited hours. You might want to leave super early in the morning and that shuttle may not run as early as you might want it to. Or is there an Uber or Lyft, that sort of thing? So consider, how are you going to get from the airport to wherever you want to go? So think about those things, plan ahead, do some research. Questions? Any other questions, Dan, that we should address here?
Some related, most of it we've covered. I think we're okay to move on. I'm jotting down some other ones for stuff we're going to get to soon.
Okay, cool. All right, let's jump ahead to the next one here. Now, like I said, I'm not going to spend as much time. I'm not going to go into details of airspace other than VFR weather minimums. I am going to spend some time on that one. mainly because we talked about airspace a lot over the last few episodes. And so I definitely would refer you back to that. But one of the things that I like to do when it comes is, and this is one of my pro tips later on, is you need to plan ahead. No matter what, if you want to fly like a pro, plan ahead. I used to fly cross country all the time when I was flying freight. And it was, you know, the one thing was that I knew my routes, but even on a new route, I was always planning ahead and I'd brief it and I knew what was coming. And so in this case, let's say that I'm leaving, and I think this is Waukegan, is that right? Waukegan Airport is up near Chicago.
Yep.
And so I just use this as an example because the it was relatively, like, the Bravo wasn't crazy looking. And so let's say, for example, that I don't want to try flying through the Bravo. It might be difficult with Chicago's airspace, it's very busy. And so maybe I decide I'm just going to go around it. And so with my cross country, I just looked at, remember we talked about this in a past episode, these airways, and they tell you what altitude you can fly. And so it's here, it says at or below 3,500. So I might plug in the GPS waypoint. This one's called Farm. So I'd fly from my airport, staying below the shelf here. It's at 3,600, so I can stay at 3.5 and be okay. I might even go a little lower, just stay just out past this shelf without talking to them, because I can tell it's 3,600 right here. And so I'd fly out and then just fly using the flyways as my guide, and then just use the GPS or use, ForeFlight to help you with that navigation, and then get down to the airport where I'm going. So it's pretty straightforward. Just plan ahead. Don't think you're going to figure this out when you get there. And in fact, the other thing that I would do when it comes to Bravo or Charlie, let's say that you decide, I really would like to go direct through. So I'm going to look up, I'm going to have my frequencies on hand. But it's like, if I know that I'm going to try to navigate a Bravo, and Charlie is a little easier, but any of these types of airspace, I'm going to look up the frequency and I'm going to jot that down ahead of time somewhere so that I know when I get close, I already have that, whether it's on my flight log or whatever I might be using, or just some notes that I'm going to have. So I know those frequencies, I know who I want to call and their name, but then I also have this backup plan. I already know too that if they won't let me through, then I already know this, I've planned out plan B. I'm going to then, if I reach this point, they don't let me through, I've already planned out that I'm going to go to this waypoint instead. I'm going to go to this altitude, and then I'll be able to circumnavigate the airspace and just stay out of it. And that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of complication here. I think the biggest thing is probably the intimidation of talking to them, which just takes practice.
Chris, another best practice, I think, for a plan B is if you're using an EFB, before you go, if you print out your flight plan, then you've always got a copy available on your kneeboard or within grasp in case you've got an issue with the iPad battery or otherwise.
Yes. So in fact, you can do that with both the sort of things like a ForeFlight or the EFB or the online planners like AOPAs or SkyVector. Yep. So yeah, print out that nav log. It's good to have as a backup, and paper charts too. Like I use my ForeFlight, but I like to have paper charts when I'm doing these things as a backup as well. And of course, a lot of times the EFBs will also be available on your phone, so you can put it on there as a backup too. So you can have 2 backups or 3 backups. So redundancy is a good thing. All right, I'm hoping that's good on the airspace. Like I said, we've done episodes a lot into detail just recently this past year, at the beginning of the year. So I would definitely refer you back to that for the airspace stuff, or also ASI's course on, what is it called? Know Before You Go, which is all in airspace.
Have you heard of airportcourtesycars.com?
I have not heard of that.
In one of the comments. I haven't, but I love the idea of it. I hope it's a real thing.
Wonder if there's reviews on them too, because I remember sometimes, usually they're really nice, but sometimes I had one I remember that my hands just stuck to the steering wheel. It was kind of gross. It was really weird. So okay, so other types of airspace. Like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about military operations areas and restricted areas, because these have come up multiple times in questions that I've gotten talking about cross countries. So the first one, the MOA or military operation area, and I did 2 different examples here. I did, this is what it would look like on a ForeFlight. And over here, this is restricted, but this is like using a paper chart. So I tried to use both for informational purposes. With an MOA, the question we most often get is, can you fly through them if they're active? Are you allowed to fly through them, or can ATC tell you to stay out? You are allowed to fly through them. Now, if it's active, AKA the military is in there doing stuff, even though you are allowed to fly in there, you definitely, at a bare minimum, would want to be talking to the controlling agency. So like flight following will do that for you. And I mentioned the word, we'll talk about it later. But if you're on with flight following, you're already talking to the right folks. Or like in this case, I tapped on it and on the screen, and then it pulled up this information. I had actually tapped on it to give me a bunch of options. I had to find the right thing, which was in this case, this Lake Placid West MOA. and then it will tell you the information about where it is. Now, the one thing actually I was remiss because I didn't pay special close attention is I forgot that Florida does not provide the frequencies for their MOAs. Most of them will. And so the frequency normally would be there for your most, but for whatever reason, the Florida ATC there, they didn't want to put that on the thing. Talk to your flight following. You can find that by looking at the airport, like pulling up an airport description as well. So again, this will be good to know. Before I go flying, I would want to know, is the frequency there? What is the frequency for what I'm going to cross? And of course, in an MOA, they're doing things like Top Gun type stuff, practice maneuvering, dogfighting, that kind of thing. So if you can avoid it, it's probably a good idea if it's active. But if you can't, say, for example, you're flying into an airport that's inside of it, make sure you're talking to the controlling agency.
Hey, Chris, quick question for you. This one's a really, really important one. Your steering wheel story with the courtesy car, was it sticky because of like gum or food or junk on your hands, or was it the steering wheel? We just needed clarification on that.
The steering wheel felt sticky, like it had melted and was permanently sticky. It was the weirdest thing. I still can vividly remember it. It's been years, but it was when I was flying freight, I remember, and I got in this car and I was like, this is just gross. So I don't think it was from food. I think maybe the plastic was coming apart or something, because it was kind of that foam type stuff. It was just weird.
I love it. And we've got a lot of confirmations that airport courtesy cars is indeed a real thing. And there's lots of reviews on there as well. So reviews of the cars, but also cafes, information, food, things like that too. So
as always, our audience providing some good information. That's a good tip. And then when it comes to restricted areas, you can fly through these if they're not active or if you have permission. But if you're not sure, just don't plan on flying through them. But
do you know, in MOAs, like there's the FARs when it comes to speed, things like that. And so the question came up, is the military required to comply with the FARs when operating in an MOA? Interesting question.
In fact, I'm not going to say I'm 100% sure, but I'm going to say I'm 99% sure, because I know that they operate on the military training routes and they can go faster than those speed limits. So I would say no, they do not have to do that when they're on a plan or whatever they're doing. So yes, that's why you got to be cautious.
Do you know if those aircraft transmit ADSB that we can see as well? Any idea on that one?
I don't know that one. That's a good question. That's why the flight following thing is so critical, because they are talking to them and can see them on their radar. So yeah, I don't know that we would see them on ADSB. That's a great question. Maybe some of the audience knows that one and can throw that out for us.
Do active MOAs show up in NOTAMs, or is that better to just contact the controlling agency?
Controlling agency. And in fact, what you'll see is just like for the restricted areas here. So here's like what it would look like on a paper chart. The MOA would look just like this, except it would be magenta. And then over here, you can see the hours. So it's intermittent, normally daylight hours, Monday through Friday, occasionally Saturday and Sunday, other times by NOTAM. So it depends. Some of them will tell you, like on this one, for this restricted area, intermittent, and it tells you the times. There's some that are just active all the time, and they'll just say that. So like they'll give you the basic information on these, and then they'll tell you, like this one does, other time it might be by NOTAM. And in fact, you'll see that. In fact, I know when you get your pre-flight briefing, if you pay attention to where your route is taking you and to what airspace you're crossing. So jot down these MOAs or any other kinds of special use airspace, and look for those during your briefing, because there's a huge list in your briefing under NOTAMs, and it'll talk about the types of the airspace things that are active right now and that might be applicable.
Lots of comments from our audience today about military with ADSB. They have the ability to, but don't always do so, and aren't always required to. It depends on the mission. So lots of answers that basically all said that same thing. So good situational awareness for a group.
Absolutely. And somebody was just asking us all, there are the times on these local or Zulu, and my gosh, this says 0600 to 24. Man, I want to say that it might be local, but I'd have to check on that. So don't hold me to that. I will have to look that one up. I don't remember off the top of my head if they are, because these times, like 800 to 1800, man, that sure sounds like it would be a local time, not a Zulu, because otherwise it'd be like 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. So we'll have to double check on that one and see. Okay, so that's the basic idea with restricted areas. Like I said, if you can talk to ATC, and if you get permission, you can go through restricted areas with their permission. But if you're not sure and it typically is active, just try to plan your route around it instead. Okay, let's keep moving on here. There are temporary flight restrictions that we need to be aware of. And of course, those are established by NOTAM, and it's for things like VIPs, some government officials, obviously. It could be for fire fighting or other kind of natural disasters or some kind of national security thing. So they can pop up. They're typically by NOTAM, so you'll get those during your pre-flight. You can also be checking with ATC along the way. And the one thing you definitely want to be aware of, if you're not aware of, is that now on the sectional charts, they have this diamond symbol, which shows you stadiums, because there are automatic TFRs that pop up around sporting events. So things like, anything that's any more than 30,000 seats, then it's a 3 nautical mile wide, 3,000 foot high, that's AGL, TFR that pops up around those. And the cool thing is, this is ForeFlight over here. This is Wrigley Field, and it shows that at the time that just happened to be when I was catching the screenshot, it was active, and that's why I did it. And so I tapped on it, and it even showed you the schedule for the Cubs and who they're playing and that kind of stuff, so that tell you when it's going to typically be active. So ATC will not necessarily know the game schedule. They probably won't. So it's up to you to avoid, and if in doubt, stay clear. Stay 3 nautical miles away, minimum 3,000 feet, more than 3,000 feet above, and probably give yourself some a little bit of, that's the other thing I see that Drew's mentioned in that. Anyway, so give yourself some leeway there, so don't get too close. And yeah, in fact, there is the Disney TFR that I'm showing right here. There's a big debate because it's a permanently charted temporary flight restriction, which is kind of weird. And then people get vectored through it all the time. So
that happened to me a bunch flying down there. Yep, especially when flying IFR, I got vectored through that all the time. Very common.
So I see 2 on here really quick. Somebody mentioned also the website tfr.faa.gov, which is a great one too. You can just Google TFRs as the FAA version. And then somebody else asked, will they give you score updates? And I can tell you, Center will do things like that, because I've been on with Center, and if they're not busy, I can remember I was heading up to Las Vegas on a freight run, and somebody asked about what happened in that fight, and they were talking about that. So that stuff can happen, obviously workload permitting. So plan for airspace. This one, I'm going to, just watching our time, I'm going to skip over this one for now because it's a little preview, but coming up in September, we are going to do an entire episode on the DC Special Flight Rules area. So I just want to keep moving on. So we'll skip this one for right now because we are going to talk about it in detail. So look forward to that one in September. This one I do want to talk about. One of the most common things that I hear is, how do I remember those weather minimums, the VFR weather minimums? And so for this, I love Rod Machado's airspace memory aid. It is out of his private pilot handbook, as you can see on the bottom there. There is a link to a video of him on YouTube doing exactly what I'm about to do, and I will do an abbreviated version of this. Remember, to get the full details, check out his video, and you can see how he explains this. Here's the basic deal with this one. I talk about this one in Rusty Pilots all the time. The vast majority of our airspace that we spend our time flying in is below 10,000 feet. So this triangle right in here is the most important one, I think. Notice that you're below 10,000 MSL, and this covers airspace Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. So that's typically where we're flying. The weather minimums in this below 10,000 feet, so surface to 10,000, if you're in Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo, notice those little asterisks with the Bravo, is 3 statute miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 below, and 2,000 horizontal. Notice the order I do that in: 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal, because what I remember is 152, 3 152s. I literally have this memorized, and that's what I remember. Below 10,000 feet, in pretty much all the airspace that I will fly in, my minimums are 3 152s, 3 statute miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal from those clouds, and that will keep you in the clear and legal. The other time that we spend, maybe we do spend some time climbing up above 10,000 feet. So I just remember 3 152s covers pretty much everything. These 2 wings out here with the Golf, especially this one on the right, that is like, it's like fringe stuff for a lot of us because we typically don't spend a lot of time down low in Gulf airspace. But look at the above 10,000 feet. If I climb above 10, then I've got 5 statute miles visibility, 1,000 above, 1,000 below, and 1 mile, 1 statute mile away from it. We'll go back to that really quick. So 1 statute mile away. So that's 5 111 or 5 111s. I remember the F-111 from Vietnam, that Vietnam era aircraft. So I remember 5 111s or 3 152s. And of course, the reason why are they greater up here? Because once you get that 10,000 foot and above, the speed limits go away. And so now the jets are moving even faster. So you want more visibility. A question I often get when I'm training people is, well, how do I know if I'm 3 miles away from a cloud or 5 miles away from a cloud? And the easy way to remember that one is If a Boeing 747 comes out of that cloud, how far do you want to be away from it? And that will keep you well clear of the clouds from not getting too close to them. So that's the way I remember these. Notice here, I'll just explain this very quickly again, that we have our Gulf airspace at night below 10,000 feet, and that's the same, 3 152s. So pretty much I have two things to remember, 3 152s and 5 111s. For pretty much all my operations below 10,000 feet, 3 152s, except in Bravo. Here's the little asterisk, because it's just 3 and clear of clouds. And then above 10,000 feet, it's 5 111s, 5 111, 1,000 above, 1,000 below, 1 horizontal. I know I did that very quickly just because of the sake of time, but check out Rod's video. He will go through it and go it nice and slow, and you can check that out. He also explains over here, this is what I call the fringe area, because I do not recommend these minimums, even though they're legal in Gulf airspace, that if you're below 10,000 down to 1,200 AGL, you can operate with 1 statute mile visibility and 152 or 152. For my instrument pilots out there, if you've flown in 1 mile visibility, you know that that is like, I do not fly VFR in that. That is crazy. And in fact, even 3 miles is not great visibility. I really prefer like 5 or more. So this for me, I don't even pay attention to this. I just think 3 152s, because it's like this 1 mile is nuts to fly VFR. And if you're below 1,200 AGL, it's just telling you in Gulf airspace, below 1,200 AGL, you can do 1 in clear of clouds. And again, that 1 mile is so low. The only time I might use that clear of clouds part, just knowing that, is maybe if there's a weird thing where I'm in a non-towered field, there's a cloud like sitting over the field, and I know every place else that I can see is just VFR and no worries in visibility. I can use that to get out, to depart. But other than that, this 1 mile visibility I think is way too low for VFR flying. That's just my opinion, and I recommend to everybody I speak with, like, don't do that. If you're going to be doing that, fly on instruments and get your instrument thing.
Here's one for you, Chris. What is the definition of a cloud? If you can see through the cloud, is it a cloud?
Is it? Yeah. Do you want to explain that to a judge? I guess that's what it comes down to. So don't play with things like that. And in fact, I saw somebody saying this, it's not visibility, it is clearance from clouds, but it is, it's 1 statute mile. Let's go, I'll double check on that, because he's saying that, and I'll double check on that definition, but it's like basically get you stay away from the clouds and have good visibility. Okay, let's keep going. Weather analysis. Now, for the weather, we had some questions basically about, how do I know long range planning? Like, how do I know if I'm going to do my cross country and I'm going to fly and I'm going to stay for a couple of days and come back? How do I know that I can get back? Well, the short answer is you don't. We do the best that we can. You really don't know. And there's a great article by George Perry, former head of the Air Safety Institute. And there's a link on there. GA is a 90% solution. And basically what he says is that, we're not the airlines. And so we can't treat it like the airlines. In fact, he was a former Navy pilot, and he said, we shouldn't, in the article he mentions, like, we should not have the mindset of a mission in GA. It's something that we would like to do. It's something that would be nice to make this flight, but we always need to have a plan B or a plan C or whatever, always have a backup plan. And so in the cases of flying cross country, we need to be ready that, we might get stuck for a couple of days in weather, or we might have to drive, and that's okay. Or we might have to land somewhere we weren't planning. So when it comes down to that, this is the most important mindset you can have for safety. Do not push your airplane beyond its capabilities. We are flying small, generally speaking, GA aircraft. We're not flying airliners that are certified for icing conditions. We're not flying with a crew, which is what makes the airline so much safer. And even they get weathered out sometimes. So just keep that in mind. Now, for the long range planning, like, do I know? There's the typical source you could use, like the Weather Channel, weather.com, or your typical just long range. I really like, and I find that I really enjoy this one, is in ForeFlight. I like the weather thing, where you can get a daily weather, and it goes over a week away. And I find that generally that's as good as anything else when it comes to accuracy. So it will tell you if they think it's going to be VFR and give you some kind of aviation related. So I really like that one. I'm trying to, no, I didn't put it on here. And also prog charts can be useful, which I believe I show on the next slide. So prog charts over several days are good as well. So you can use those to kind of get an idea. But again, keep that mindset that you just don't know. You may have to have a plan B. You may have to drive. You may have to stay. So just be prepared. Should you start a flight from clear weather into clouded weather? And as that long range, as I was talking about the long range forecast. So the thing here was, and I think it's on the next slide as well, it's like, how do I know? It's like, how do I know I can fly into a clouded area? Well, you need to have a really solid forecast along the way, knowing that if I fly, let's say, over a cloud deck, am I going to have room to get down? If I do, and this is something that Dave Hirschman talks about in his article that's in there, his 12 tips, I think, for long range flying, is the ceiling low enough below, or sorry, high enough below, that if I had to descend on an engine out, that I have enough room to find a landing spot? So you got to make these decisions. And I would suspect that a lot of folks might be like, you know what, I'm not really comfortable with that, and so don't do it. So check those weather forecasts for your, when it comes to trying to get somewhere where there may be a cloud deck over your destination. That's where it's so important to have that plan B, plan C. Like, I know that it's like, if this gets, I don't like the way it looks, I already know where I'm going. I'm going to divert here, and I know that it's good VFR weather forecast there and showing. So it's really comes down to that decision making and being flexible. So go back to that 90% solution idea. It's a lot of fun. It's really cool, but we also know that we're not the airline, so we don't want to try to do that. Keep out of that mindset. When it comes to weather analysis as well, dealing with conflicting weather forecasts. So what do we do when the AirMet says IFR over a whole area, but I'm looking at the observed weather? It's like, and I'm looking outside and it's all clear. Well, that's where you've got to look at your local forecasts and observations. What are the METARs telling you? What are the PIREPs telling you? It's like, are they showing that the area, remember the AirMets and SIGMETs and things cover often huge areas, and the bigger the areas get, they may only be talking about the significant weather, maybe 50% of that area. So you've got to compare that. So it's giving you a warning. And I can tell you that here in Frederick, we're not far from the Appalachian Mountains right here to our west. And so a lot of times we get mountain obscuration warnings on the AirMets, but I will go flying a lot and I look over there and there's nothing there, or I know that I can avoid it. So you just got to know where you're going. And it's like, do you have, I don't even push it. If I don't, usually I don't have to worry about having an out. I know the weather's good enough that I don't need to worry about having an out. But if I were, I want to plan that. And that's what I used to do when I was flying freight. I always knew, I was flying instruments, I was flying every day. I was very proficient, but I still always knew where my outs were. I knew where I wanted to go. So compare that. So the biggest thing is compare it with the weather observations and the forecasts along your route to see if that AirMet seems to be applicable to what you're doing. Because remember, they cover large areas with these warnings. And then the cloud heights. How do you know cloud heights? So the cloud heights, I would definitely recommend, and this is available on aviationweather.gov, is you can use this graphical forecast for aviation. And there's also, these all come up in standard charts as well, but they will tell you. And in fact, if you can kind of look right here, I clicked on this one and it says overcast 2,900, tops at 9. So the person was asking, we usually see the bottom, but how high is the top? Look at PIREPs to see if there are any, but then you can also look at this forecast. It will give you an idea of what they think is going to happen. And in fact, here I use that same one and I just changed the menu. I'm gonna go back one. So the menu here is set on forecast and I chose clouds. Then you can click on this observation and warning. So I did that, and then I was able to pull up PIREPs for that same area, and then I could see what the pilots out there were telling us. And this is, of course, why it's important to be giving PIREPs as well. All right, any questions on this before I move on?
Just there was kind of a neat thought processes. If you're serious about cross-country flying, and this would help with all aspects of it, an instrument rating is a very valuable tool to have. And not necessarily to put you into more difficult situations, but to help get you out of one that you may inadvertently encounter.
And that kind of gets into sort of my pro tips, is exactly a recommendation I'll make. If you're really thinking I want to go do this cross-country stuff, I'm going to do it on a regular basis, and I want to be able to have more capability. Notice I say more capability, not airline capability. Then get that instrument rating and stay proficient, because your weather is going to happen, and sometimes it's going to be unexpected. And so having an instrument rating gives you more options. But even with that, that doesn't mean you're a 100% go. You've really got to be careful, because there's things like icing and then conditions that get down too low. So really, really be cautious. All right. For me, the in-flight pro tip number one is that I learned the hard way, I can tell you, is stay ahead of the aircraft. I learned this during my instrument rating. I can remember my instructor just letting me, because it's like he would tell me and tell me and tell me. We were on across country, and then he just stopped warning me and just let me get myself into trouble. And all of a sudden I'm cruising along, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, here comes the approach. And I wasn't briefed, and I was so behind the airplane, it felt awful. Him letting me have that experience burned into me. Keep asking what's next, what's coming up next, what can I prepare for? So here are the kind of things that I think about when I'm flying, that I'm always doing this, and I try to instill this in my own students. What's next? What's my next frequency? Do I already have that planned out? Do I not know? Am I looking ahead? What's coming? What's the next frequency going to be? What's the ATIS at my destination? When can I get that? I already try to program that in as soon as possible. So as soon as I get close, I can get that ATIS as early as possible. Looking ahead, once I know the ATIS, right, looking on my, my EFB, what's the wind doing at my destination? Hopefully I already know from my pre-flight planning, but I'm going to verify, is it still as planned? What's my pattern direction going to be so I can start planning my approach to that airport, specifically if it's non-tower. Towered, they're just going to give you directions, but I can already have an idea of what runway they're probably using. And for the altitudes, what's my next altitude? In your pre-flight planning, so many folks, they get their certificates done and they go on across country like, I'm not going to bother with all that anymore. And that's a bad idea. Plan your flights out so you're not surprised. And in fact, it makes it really easy now using EFBs, using SkyVector, the AOPA flight planning tool. It calculates your top of climb for you and your top of descent. So you know, when should I reach my climb, my top altitude? When should I start my descent? It will determine all these things for you. It makes it really easy. And then be thinking, when is that coming? What's coming up next? Where are my alternates? I spend a lot of my time, or actually I should say, I am always vigilant, I should say, because I'm flying along, where's my closest airport? And then I'm looking around me. If I lost my engine right now, where would I put it down? So I'm always thinking these things. It's just in my mind, just running. And then I'm also checking the engine instruments. Every time I get a minute, I run a flow, checking the engine. So it just becomes habit. It's not something that's like, it's not something where it's like it takes up all your time, but you're always in that mindset of it becomes a habit. And as it becomes a habit, it becomes easier. It's just part of what I do while I'm flying. And of course, watching for traffic. When it comes to performance, I already mentioned use the charts for the airplane, but I highly would recommend developing standard procedures for your aircraft. I learned this when I was instructing out in Arizona, and then it got, obviously they were training us to become airline pilots. So when I flew freight, I was already used to this. And so the freight company I had told us this is what we do. These are our power settings. This is what you would see. We even had to jot down engine temps and things like that to help them monitor performance. So highly recommend doing that for your aircraft to develop some standard procedures. For me in a 172, I know my climb power, I know my climb speeds. I know for cruise, if I'm going cross country, 2,300 RPM, and then I can just look at that to get my fuel burn. And I already kind of know a conservative fuel burn. I go 10 gallons an hour, is super conservative. And then I can check the charts and see, but I just give it that little bit of edge on the sense of least or worst performance so that I'm going to have plenty. And then one other thing that I'd recommend is this. I learned this during instrument flying. I used it while I was flying freight, and I still use it now. Even on VFR cross countries, I have a little chart, heading, altitude, frequency. So when I'm on with flight following, I can jot down my heading. I don't always use this. This is typically for instrument stuff. But if ATC gives me a heading to fly, boom, I jot it down so I have a reference so I know what they told me. And then as they change it, I'll cross that one off and write the next one down. But I have a reference going back. I do the same with my altitude. If ATC assigns me altitude, or if I've decided on what altitude, I just jot it down. And then as I go to the next one, I just put a single line through it and just write the next one down. And this is the most valuable one, is the frequency one. So they told me contact Potomac approach 126.1. I already know before I take off which I should be contacting them on. Then they hand me off and I jot the next one down. And the great thing about this is if you go to a new frequency and you can't contact them, I already know the frequency to go back to. So this is I really found this really valuable when it comes to staying ahead of the aircraft and keeping track of what's going on. And I jot down clearances and everything else too. So just these are big things you can do to fly like a pro, do the kind of things that airline pilots do. All right, we've got about 7 minutes left at our normal times. Let me see if I can hit this. And I'm sure we'll get some questions about this one, but did someone say flight following?
Oh no, here we go.
The thing that I thought was really cool before I even talk about any of this, because of course, we always get questions about flight following. There was an article that Jill Tallman here at AOPA wrote, and it's literally called Technique Flight Following. There's a link on the handout. Go check it out. And then I provided a link to this, which is part of the Air Safety Institute's sample radio calls. So check this out too. I just pulled out the part on flight following because somebody asked, how do I get it? How do I know what frequency? What do I say? So first of all, question came up, flight following, is that redundant if you're using a VFR flight plan? And I would say no. I would say that it is complementary. They go together. The flight plan is for search and rescue. They are, and I'll talk about the ATC frequencies just a second, Charlie. So The flight plan is going to help you with a search and rescue. Like, did you show up on time? Did you actually arrive? So I always like to fill this out because you don't know if flight following you might get kicked off of it because of their workload. So the flight plan, especially on a longer cross country, is definitely a good idea to have to file one of those. And then when it comes to flight following, now you've got that traffic avoidance, you've got that help if you need it. Somebody, just another set of eyes. So I highly recommend doing flight following, whether it's on a cross country or even if you're out. If you're able, like in the practice area, we used to use flight following too, depending on where we were, like out by Luke Air Force Base. When I was training out there, we would call up Luke and they would give us flight following and help us avoid the F-16s that were flying around. So definitely use both of them. I would highly recommend both. How to contact them? Go ahead, Dan.
Well, just radar services flight following. Is there a best practice to refer to them to call?
Not really. ATC knows what we're saying. We usually say like requesting flight following. You can say requesting traffic advisors is the official term. They all get it. It's like I've never had any trouble saying any of these. So I don't really think it's an issue as long as we're all, understanding. I did misspell complimentary. Thank you. Look at that. It should be with the E. So well done. So how to contact them. So frequencies, the frequencies, what you want to do is it's just your approach frequency. So you begin with checking the chart supplement, checking in whether it's the electronic version in your EFB or you have the paper version, but get that local ATC frequency and that's who you're going to call. If it's the wrong frequency, they will tell you. They'll get you on radar and say, oh, you want to talk to this person. They'll tell you the right frequency. So that's how you get those. You got to look them up ahead of time. That's, again, it's that planning part. So find out from your local airport, like look on there in the chart supplement, it'll show the frequencies, get it out of there before you take off. You can also ask tower, if you're at a tower field, you can ask them if they know, they will typically know what the frequency is for the approach, control, or departure. So you can ask them as well. But if you're at a non-tower field, you have to go look it up. Okay, what to say? Boom, right there, here's a script. So that's the biggest thing. It's a great example of that. The only thing that it doesn't specify that I would talk about, in fact, Jill does talk about in her article, but I would talk about is it just depends on how busy they are. I might start with a, hey, VFR request if they're really busy. So I just give them my call sign, 35, what am I thinking, 163 Mike Echo, VFR request, or if they're not busy, I may go ahead and just, go ahead and say I'm requesting flight following, blah, 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 blah. But I like to do that little short one first because it lets them get ready to jot down before I spew off all this information about my airplane and my end number and stuff. So here's what to say right here, and check out Jill's article. 2 great resources to help you out. And then here it is, services. They give you traffic advisors. I already mentioned all this. Check out the article. All right. Last bit that I wanted to mention before we go to questions. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to. I think we can do it, Dan. I think we can do it.
Nailed it.
Remember that you are the pilot in command. So you are the PIC. So remember, when it comes to these decisions about weather and what you're going to do and the capability, remember, you're the one that's responsible for the safe operation and outcome of that flight. So keep that in mind. You are the captain and you're responsible. Take that seriously and brief your passengers on the stuff too. Let them know that whole idea, GA is a 90% solution. Tell them ahead of time, like, I'm not going to push this airplane beyond what I think is safe. So just want to let you know that we may have to divert. We may end up landing somewhere else. We might get stuck. So I'm happy to take you with me, but just be prepared to be flexible. Don't think of this as an airline, because it's not. And that way we can stay safe and I can keep you safe. So remember, you're responsible. That said, if things start to happen in the aircraft, remember that you're a pilot in command. Don't be afraid to declare an emergency or to tell them that you need something. I've had this happen to me. What if ATC routes you over inhospitable terrain? Somebody asked. If you're VFR, don't be afraid to tell them, like, I'm unable to do that. I don't want to continue flying over Lake Michigan. You're like, I don't want to do that because I don't have flotation or I'm just not comfortable. You're VFR, you can do what you need as long as you're not inside Bravo airspace or Charlie. You can do what you need to do. So tell them, unable, this is what I need to do.
I had that situation happen flying down in Florida. Exactly. I flew down to Key West, following the Keys down, and on the way back, had filed a flight plan and everything. It was all VFR and was cleared direct, which put me straight over the Gulf of Mexico, and wasn't comfortable with that. So I just took that initiative and said, unable, prefer to, fly along the coast, and it was all fine. And I had the equipment there, so it would have been safe. It would have been okay, but still, that was just my preference. So I'm like, I just don't feel like going over this big body of water right now. So I'm gonna play it safe.
And ATC is okay, typically okay with this. It's like they're. I've hardly ever been given a hard time about this kind of stuff because you are the one in the airplane. You're responsible for the safe operation, not them. They're there to help us provide traffic separation, and they want to help us. So it's not an adversarial thing. And 99% of the time, they're there to help you. You might get somebody who's grumpy, but don't give up your piloting command authority because of that. And then when it comes to IFR, it's a little different. So it's like negotiating the routes, but you can tell them like, I really want to file this as planned, or you can talk to them. It's a little harder when it comes to IFR, just because they're responsible for your traffic separation. But let them know what your concerns are. That you really don't want to be flying over this inhospitable terrain. So VFR is easier. You can pick your route. The IFR is a little harder, but then just express your concern. This is what I need, and I'm willing to wait or whatever. So just tell them what's going on. And then the other part I would highly recommend, and there's a link to these in the handout as well, the Air Safety Institute has these personal minimums contracts, and this is something that I highly recommend. Develop your own personal minimums. When I was flying freight, I could not just go do whatever I wanted. We had minimums on weather. Certain airfields I could not go to unless the weather was at least VFR, or we had cloud minimums and things like that. And I was flying every day doing that, and so it was very proficient. And so if professional pilots flying every day have minimums, we should too, even though the regs don't require it. So those personal minimums contracts, there's links on the handouts. You can go check those out. And I'd highly recommend working with your CFI or somebody trusted to develop those. And then the key part is develop them, stick to them, because it makes decision-making easier. And then don't change them while you're in the air. You make a vow, I will not change these minimums while I'm in the air. And so it makes decision-making easier. Minimums are going below my personal minimums, I am now landing. So the weather's going below it, whatever it is, the clouds are lower than what I specify, the winds are higher, whatever it might be, I'm gonna go land now, this is done. So it makes it easy instead of that debating of like, well, maybe I could do it. Don't do those kind of things, because that's how people get in trouble. Okay. This is just a bonus slide. This is in the article by Dave Hirschman. I talked about a lot of this stuff already, but check out his article. But more importantly, we're going to come to the official end here, because I know folks may have to get back to work and things like that. We will stick around for a bit answering questions. But Stephen, really quick, give them their code, and then I'll talk about the next episode.
Okay, so you should be able to see it there on the screen. It's YCF WEB 072023. So you can fly, web, and today's date for the pilot passport badge.
And is this the same as Wings Credit?
It is not. This is completely separate, different thing. It has nothing to do with Wings Credit. This is a function of our AOPA app. So if you have it downloaded, within the AOPA app, there is the passport function. And that ties into a bunch of maps, information, details of different airports around the country, and allows you to check in and make some posts and information about your flying experiences. And it does have some badges and point systems that it tracks. So you can kind of keep track of where you've traveled, and every once in a while our marketing folks will do some contests and give away prizes. So it's a way to kind of gamify traveling around and seeing other places.
Cool. All right, so there's your code, and I will bring the screen back up in a minute, but let me just very quickly mention, next time, we in August 17th, 2023. These are my tentative titles. They may change. That was just brainstorming. But
like it.
No engine, or more pilot, less engine, all about gliders. And so we're really excited to have Scott Manley on with us to talk about this one. So I'm really looking forward to that. I did my glider rating a few years back. Unfortunately, I've not been very good about going out and flying gliders again. I need to do that, and I would like to. But we're going to have an expert come on with us and talk about gliders, because we've had requests for this episode, and I'm super excited about it because I love gliders. Can't wait to do it. So if you have any questions or if you have any topics, please throw them in the chat. If you've got ideas, and Dave Hirschman's tips, they are in the article, Glenn. Look in the handout. There's Dave Hirschman's things. It's 12 tips for cross-country flying. And so it's, again, just go there in the handout. There's a link to the article, and you guys should read the entire thing rather than just my little summary bullets. And then reference to, okay, so that I knew somebody's asking questions there. So future topics, if you have ideas for future topics, throw them in the chat. Any requests, we love hearing from you, or you can email us at ftinitiative@aopa.org. All right, Dan, I think that about covers it up. I want to put the code back here real quick. Again, ideas for topics, throw them in the chat, or ftinitiative@aopa.org. There's the code on the screen. What questions do we have?
Well, here's a great perspective question, is that, and believe it or not, Scott shared it here, but airplane pilots are only are only one engine failure away from being a glider pilot. So we're all close to being there, even if we haven't done that training for it. So a couple questions, points. Stephen, maybe you can help us out with us. But registering for the webinar, to access the webinar, you need to give us your email address, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so that is the same. So attending the webinar,
register.
registering the webinar, that's going to take care of it. If it's your FAAsafety.gov email address, you're good to go. We got it set. If not, let us know at ftinitiative@aopa.org, and we'll give you credit for that. Again, only for those watching live. If you're watching recorded, we're unable to provide that credit for
Correct.
you. Okay, so
Hey, Dan,
here.
I got one quick clarification because somebody asked about it and I had a chance to look it up. They had mentioned that they didn't think that the weather minimums I went over in rods were visibility, distance from clouds. That is not true. So the 3 statute miles or the 5 statute miles, those are flight visibility minimums according to 91-155. And so those are flight visibility minimums you need to have. And then those other distances are away from the clouds. So the 500 above, 1,000 below, 2,000 horizontal. So just to clarify that those are flight visibility when it comes to those 3 statute miles or 5 statute miles. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so a couple questions, notes. You were looking at long range weather in ForeFlight. Do you know how to access that easily? I guess there's people that
Yes.
aren't aware of that.
Yep. So the easiest way, let me just pop back to that slide. What I did was you can kind of see it over here. So you go to airport and you can access it in 1 or 2 different ways. On the map screen, which is what I was doing, you can kind of see it in my picture here. I just clicked on an airport and the airport information pops up, and then you just click on the tab that says weather and you can choose, and I chose the daily. And then the cool thing is then you can click on the day and it'll pull up this thing, which gets even more detail about the winds, and it's an hourly forecast. I love this. I actually use this in my daily life just to see when somebody asks me weather, I'm like, well, let me check the old aviation weather. So I really like this one a lot. So I think that's a really good one. And in fact, I compare it all the time to see how accurate it is, and it's generally pretty good.
Windy.com is always one that
Yes.
was recommended a lot of times on that one, and that is
Yeah.
very cool, especially for the visual interpretation. If
Yeah.
you're not exactly sure what's going on, you look at it like, aha, I get it. Strength, direction, it works really good. Awesome.
Windy.com is an awesome website.
Yep.
I agree.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so let's go through here. Do you know, Chris, since we're talking tech, is the iPhone Compass app more reliable than a whiskey compass?
I do not know it. I haven't tested it. I have played around with that compass just on the ground, never in the air. It's okay. It's like, I don't know that I would trust it over a whiskey compass. Obviously, it's got GPS information, maybe is what they're thinking, but I don't know that I trust it for trying to fly in flight. I honestly, what I would trust is the ForeFlight when it comes to navigate, or ForeFlight or an EFB combined with your GPS information and stuff like that. I've found to be pretty darn accurate. And in fact, I've got a Stratus. Now it's an old one. I don't know. I'm sure there's newer stuff out, but it's got the AHRS in it, the altitude heading and reference system. That thing's amazing. Like, I have tested that VFR. And so as emergency only, of course, but as an emergency thing, if I were to lose my instruments, an instrument, I would trust that to get me down to safety somewhere.
We did have a note saying you spelled complimentary correct. So we're just going to let that one go out there to the world, and we'll let the debate begin. We will probably not have a webinar topic on that one, but let it go.
No, they were, I believe that I should have used the E in complimentary instead of the I, because I remember teaching this in economics when I taught it. The I is for when you compliment someone else, like, hey, that was a really nice shirt you're wearing today. The E is when the two things go together. So it was complimentary goods in economics that I used to speak of, and that had the E in it. So I'm pretty sure they were correct. It was just my own fault in not catching that.
Here's one for you. Where do you find the ATC frequencies to center approach, et cetera, for long distance cross country flights? Any tips, tricks there?
Sure. So the thing you could do is I have to say that generally speaking, I would get the ones for departure for where I'm leaving, and then I just let them tell me what the next ones are as I go. But what you can do is you could pick out the different centers. There's a couple of ways of getting this. One way you could do it would be to just go along and pick out some of the airports along your route, and you'll be able to get them that way by looking, because they'll have the information in there, whether it's in your EFB or even just going to the chart supplement. It'll show you what those are. So you can at least have some of the frequencies along the way. And let me check really quick, because if I am not mistaken, I need to go back and look really quick on my instrument charts. do they show the frequencies? I seem to recall that they do. They do. If you're using an EFB, if you're not familiar with how to use an IFR and route chart, which is basically the IFR sectional chart, on those, they have the ATC frequencies. I can't show that right now because I can't just show that on my screen, but have a CFI or an instrument rated pilot show you on the en route charts. You could go to like SkyVector or something like that, and it has the frequencies in there, which is pretty cool. In fact, maybe I could do that. Let me see if I can pull that up, and we'll come back. So let's throw another question out while I look for that.
Well, another neat tip, like you had talked about on your flight plan, and that you would note like the top of climb expectation, things like that. Another one would be with that is to chart out the fuel consumption and the estimated time for you to switch tanks.
Oh yeah,
a great note on there to be ahead of the game, so you don't forget that.
Yeah, I would recommend, that's where I would recommend that idea of having an SOP, standard procedure for how you're going to fly your airplane, would be the way to do that. So here it is, by the way, I just went to SkyVector, and on SkyVector, I will zoom in. This is not like the, let's see, let's go world low. Here we go, that's better. It combines all the charts together. And let me zoom in. Do you see right here, this blue weird looking symbol, and it says Washington Center, the Linden VOR, and here's the frequency 133.55. Those other ones are for the military. So on a sectional, this is the center's frequency. That's Washington Center's frequency. When it comes to approach, instrument pilots have those on their approach plates already. That's where you'd want to look it up in the airport, but you can at least get the center frequencies off of these instrument ones to get flight following if you're out away from your larger airports. So
is there a border on that chart with that region, or is it just like, because we see that little box there?
Yeah, I want to say that there is. Man, you guys are asking me all the, oops, I zoomed out a little too far there. I want to say that they do show that.
Are they differentiated on there so you kind of know where the crossover lines are?
I'm just trying to remember I do recall that. I need to go back and look here again, because I know you go, here it is. I think it's this. Same type, see this symbol right here? It's very similar. And that's going to show you the border between, here's Jacksonville Center and Atlanta Center. See that? I don't know if you guys can see that well enough. I'll zoom in again. So see this, this shows you the border, and then it tells you the name of the center right there, and that's the border between them.
Okay.
So
very
that's
cool.
useful. Again,
good.
Go over with somebody that's like a CFI or an instrument rated pilot. They should be able to help you interpret some of those charts.
Yep. When talking weather, we didn't mention satellite weather much, but great opportunity, Sirius XM, for just the real world weather, what's happening right then and there. So that's a great tool.
And I didn't mention even just using ADS-B too as radar. You obviously look at the radar too, but I'm talking about pre-flight planning. We're looking on the ground ahead of time, and that's what the stuff I was trying to get at was how do you sort of figure out if I'm going to go or not.
We had a couple of notes on here that maybe this is a great future topic, but one was about flying over borders, the other one getting into Canada. So that could be a topic for the future. I don't think we'll address that in our 17 minutes left here today, but could be a good topic for the future is international flight.
Good, and actually, we actually did that. When was that, Stephen? Last year sometime? Stephen might remember. We have an episode on international flying that we did. I want to say it was last year.
Yeah. We had a guy who's a commercial pilot that flies people on charter jets. Just talking about his different experiences going to different locations across different borders and stuff.
So yeah, we can keep that in mind, but we did that not too long ago. And there's a great section on AOPA's website on international flying and all the different notes. What I learned from doing that webinar was that there are some common themes, but a lot of the stuff is specific to that country. And so that's where our AOPA website is super useful for that.
Good.
And our Pilot Information Center, giving them a call.
Yes.
We had a snip and clip from an advisory circular about what a cloud is defined by the FAA. So I'm just reading verbatim here.
What does it say?
So this is not from us looking at from the advisory circular, but just know that this is out there. 006B. A cloud is a visible aggregate of minute water droplets and or ice particles in the atmosphere above the Earth's surface. Fog differs from cloud only in that the base of the fog is at the Earth's surface while the clouds are above the surface. So
it still doesn't specify if I could see through it, is it a cloud? But
it's saying if the moisture then I guess is visible, right? If the moisture is visible, that's a cloud.
And
That's
by the
a
way,
tough
I saw
one, though.
Jeff just tried to, I think he tried to email that address we gave you, ftinitiative@aopa.org is our email address. So email us with anything you wanted to let us know about. ftinitiative@aopa.org is our email.
Very good. Here's one about TFRs, the sporting event TFRs. If I'm flying the Lake Michigan Flyway VFR during a TFR, can I ask flight following to transition me through it? I don't want to go 3 miles out in Lake Michigan and can't go over 3,000 feet due to flyway restrictions. So can you ask to go through a TFR?
Yes, you can ask to go through a TFR, talking to the appropriate, controlling agency. Typically, its answer's probably no, but you can always ask. You can always request it.
Sure.
By the
It's
way,
possible.
just somebody making a point here, and in fact, they are exactly correct. They said that the center frequencies and things are on the VFR chart, and I forgot, they are exactly correct. It's on the panel. I forgot about that. It has all the towered, and it has the frequencies on that panel side. It's typically not showing on the graphical part. Usually the frequencies shown there are like for the airports or for flight service, but on the panel, it has those listed there. So that's one other way to find them. And then somebody else mentioned 214 flight, you can tap and find the stuff too. And that's one of the things I did, was tapping on airports or things like that. It'll pull up that information for you.
Yep, easy, quick
Play
to
with
get
that before you start flying. Do that on the ground.
Yep, sure. Several notes on referring to special use airspace and what the times are. They are unanimously suggested that it's local time. It's local,
Okay.
not UTC, on that for special use airspace. So that makes perfect
Thank
sense.
you for verifying that for us.
Yeah, yeah. Here we go. TFRFA.gov, we covered that one. That was good. And this is where we got into that section of a lot of people talking about MOAs and military and ADSB. That took a huge chunk of our questions there. So I'm going to switch back here. So let's go back to the beginning. Any tips, tricks, comments on transitioning from paper maps to moving maps with ADSB? Anything that you can think of to share to help someone's transition there?
If you have access, number one, it is not nearly as hard as you think it will be, because it is. I was amazed just the fact that you could, when you hook it up to the GPS unit of whatever sort it is, whether it's whether it's just using the cell thing or the external GPS unit, when it shows your airplane on the map, it is like so easy. It's amazing how the situational awareness that all of a sudden happens. It just makes it so much easier, and you can zoom in and out. But if you're just trying to get used to using the app, for instance, play with it on the ground. And in fact, I know one of the things I like to do is, if you have access to a simulator, and this works with at-home sims as well, because I know a lot of, like, X-Plane, for instance, will work with ForeFlight, and I believe it might work with Garmin Pilot too, but you can hook it up, and so you can fly your simulator and show it on your ForeFlight. So check out if you've got a sim at home, or like sometimes the sims that you go into at a flight school, they may be able to do that as well. They have a thing with Wi-Fi or whatever that'll hook up. But even barring that, even if you don't have that kind of capability, biggest thing is just go plan your flight out and play around, like pretend like you're flying and tap on the different things. Because when you get in the airplane and the moving map starts, it is really not difficult. And in fact, there's even a button in the upper right-hand corner. This is in ForeFlight at least, and I'm sure that Garmin Pilot, it's been a while since I used it, but you just tap it, it just centers where you are. So if you go zooming around and you lose yourself, you just tap that, it puts you right back in the middle, and you can kind of just zoom your range in and out. So it's
that all the time.
Pretty easy, yeah.
Yep.
In fact, look for the basics, sit down with a CFI or somebody that's really good at using it, and just learn little things at first. Learn the basics, because trust me, I am not any kind of ForeFlight power user. I know that it has way more capability than I know that it does, but all of them can do amazing things. So just learn the basics of what you want to do. Your flight plan, getting the weather, getting the frequencies, and then I discover things. Like even when I was doing this prep for this one, I discovered a couple of things. Like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't know it did that. So it's really neat.
Cool. When planning for a flight, is there a simple way you would recommend to get ATIS information online?
ATIS information. It's like, I'm trying to think. I don't know. Maybe somebody will know if there's a website that's out there for that. But for typically, I just look at the METARs when I'm trying to get that information. I'm not usually worried about the ATIS code, because I'll get that when I get in the airplane, and then obviously, typically by the time I get to my destination, it will have changed anyway. So
really, the METAR is what we're looking for in that situation.
The METARs will be that is the same stuff as your ATIS, other than the code and notes about the
Since you have proven to be such an amazing technical guru here with ForeFlight, iPad, all that, here's an iPhone question for you. Can you link your phone running ForeFlight to get GPS on the tablet? So I'm thinking they've got, you can link to your phone. So I wonder if that is enough to do it if your iPad was Wi-Fi only and didn't have that. Would that work like a bad elf or a GPS? So a good question that maybe we have to throw out there for the
I have
world.
not tried that, so I'd have to experiment. And I just noticed Phil and Eugene there saying that ForeFlight, yes, they do have the phone numbers, and there's somebody else or Dan. So live ATC, you can listen to it online for the ATIS. You can also get the phone numbers for the airports as well. So
yes,
yes,
I do have like Frederick's in my phone, so it's like I've got that and always make that call just when you're kind of driving and stuff like that. So that makes perfect sense. A warning, caution, that the so-called cell phone GPS, it's not really GPS, it's location data derived from cell phone tower data. So it may not be as reliable as a true GPS signal. So just be cautious with that, if you're,
good point.
you could be outside of cell tower range with your cell, and that may not be providing the information that you need to have. Another ForeFlight EFB question. Do ForeFlight other EFBs update the nav log based on live weather inputs? For example, changing high density altitude or other factors like headwinds, tailwinds, things like that. Like once you do the flight plan and you're flying it, does it adjust continually
As the weather changes?
Yeah.
That I actually don't know the answer to that one off the top of my head. I have to look that up. I'd have to check on that. So my suspicion would be, because I know that it does update the weather as you're flying. So my suspicion would be that it would go ahead and calculate that on your, like the live nav log, but I'd want to double check that before I gave an affirmative answer to that.
Well, the ETA is fluid, so it seems like that would be the case. You know, you could be flying your, 1 hour 53 minutes away for 2 or 3 minutes. That type of thing happens all the time. So perhaps that is it, but that's a good thing for us to dig a little deeper into at some point. Question: can or should I follow VFR flight plan via EFB?
Oh, absolutely. I do that all the time. So yeah, so for the for getting weather briefings and things like that, totally use the EFB for that. So, and the EFB, it's going to depend on your EFB how it works. I know that sometimes they will log into your 1-800-WX brief account to do that, and other times they'll have a service built into it. So, for example, ForeFlight does that and has a connection straight to it, just through the internet.
Good. Specific question on military training route. Do you know how wide they are?
We had this question a session or two ago, and what I've been told by military pilots, and I forget exactly what the person told us the last time, but I know I've been told by a military pilot, think 5 miles on either side, and they can be pretty wide out, and then up to 500 knots is what he told me too. So they're not going to break the sound barrier, but they can be moving. So.
Yep, for sure. Okay. Had a note about flight following, is that there was even a recommendation at one point to get flight following even if you're flying out to the practice area. Like that opportunity for every flight, it's going to be helpful. So don't be hesitant to use it.
Yep. It depends on where you are, and it's like how busy. Like with Potomac, it might be a little around here. It might be a little difficult because they're pretty busy. But like I said, in Phoenix, we used to do it all the time. So just see. But definitely for cross countries around here, without a doubt.
Yeah, we've got a couple notes saying that they think our definition. Go ahead.
Oh, so I just said ForeFlight updates weather. This is Fletcher saying this for the glide ring, so I'd assume it would update. And I said, like I said, I just don't want to say absolutely without checking, but I think it does as well.
That's good. A couple of notes questioning the definition of cross country. 61.1 B3.2 was quoted a couple times at that in the question. So I think it's specific to the situation that you're going to be logging that the definition is different based on what it's being used for, right? And that's what we
exactly. That's what I was getting at, was that at its core, cross country is point to point. However, then it depends, and in fact, I'm looking at 61.1 right now. Then from that, it depends on what you're counting it towards. So if it gets into logging purposes, like why are you logging it? So Here's the actual definition: 61.1I, which is acquired during flight. It's conducted by a person who holds a pilot certificate, so no pilot certificate, no cross country, conducted in an aircraft that includes landing at a point other than the point of departure, and that uses things like dead reckoning, pilotage, electronic aids, nav aids, et cetera, to navigate to the landing point. Then subparagraph 2 gets into, or like II, for the purpose of meeting aeronautical experience requirements for the private pilot, commercial, or instrument rating. Then it gets into that whole 50 nautical miles. So it depends on what you're logging it for. That's what I was getting at. I didn't mean to get into a legal discussion of what a cross country is. I was just doing it for fun, but it depends. And I just thought it was interesting that the actual cross country definition is just fly from one point to another, certificated, et cetera. Those distance requirements come into your training. That's the requirements that you need to meet, types of training, and the ATP is different from the private instrument commercial. Yep. So that's all that was. Nothing more serious than that.
Thank you. Stephen, we've got a couple notes about the app code not working. So
hold on. Paul just said, "What is night?" We're not going there, Paul. And he had a little smiley face with it. So that's really funny.
I love it. Here's a good one, though. For pre-flight planning, is it best recommended to get a verbal briefing by calling, 1-800-WX brief, or just relying on the EFB? What's the best practice there?
So say that one more time again, please, Dan.
Is the recommendation to call in, get a verbal weather briefing, or just to rely on the EFB?
I was in a meeting this is a couple years ago, but with the folks from Flight Service. I think back then it was still Lockheed Martin. And what they told us was that they would prefer that if you know that it's a nice, clear VFR day and you're just trying to get updates on NOTAMs and that sort of thing, they recommend just go do your online briefing. They said they obviously welcome phone calls because they were trying to balance out the online versus the phone call volume that they get. And so they said, if you have questions after looking at that, whether it's weather or NOTAM related or something like that, then definitely feel free to call. Now, if you know that the weather you're going to be flying through already you've got questions about before you even do the online briefing, that said, go ahead and call them. So they said, if it's a nice VFR day, you're just going to fly around your local airport, like I do that, they said they'd recommend just try the online thing first. If you have questions, give them a call. But if you're like right away, it's something you know is going to be more complicated, then feel free to call right away. They will never turn you down. They were just trying to manage call volume versus the online traffic.
Sure. Believe it or not, we've got a flight following question. Can't wait to share it.
Go ahead.
And it's a really good one. It's one that I thought about as well. Is like, are you required to let ATC know when you're going to change altitude during flight following?
Okay, so we've had this question before. It was on one of our Ask ATC. And in fact, we're having another Ask ATC episode coming up in October. So I can give you 3 previews. Next month, gliders. September is the DC, CIFRA. And then in October, we're planning on ATC. And so we asked that question then. And I know that Pablo used to always have issues with this when he would do his cross-country flights up to Chicago. And what would happen is that sometimes he would get yelled at for not telling them he was changing altitude, and other times he would get yelled at for telling them he was changing altitude. They're like, it's your discretion. So when it comes to flying VFR, this is not IFR, of course, but flying VFR with flight following, according to our expert, who was Damien, that came on, and in fact, we're gonna have some other folks come on next time. He told us that in the manual for ATC, your VFR, you do not have to tell them that. It's a nice courtesy maybe to tell them. He said for the controllers that were getting on his case about not telling them when he was changing altitudes, sounds like they were grumpy because it is not required of them that they have to get that report because you are VFR. So you're not getting, unless you're on vectors or things like that they're controlling you for traffic purposes, you're at your own navigation. They're there to help you with traffic. So yeah, you do not have to tell them that. You might do it as a courtesy, and of course it depends on how busy they are and that sort of thing, but you are not required to do so. So that's the answer we got from ATC.
Awesome. Chris, I think we got through a good chunk of them, and those that are still hanging out there, we've covered in some capacity today, so I think we're there.
Awesome. Well, hey guys, don't don't forget, next time, gliders. Can't wait for this episode with Scott. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. And so check us out August 17th. Hope you'll join us 12 to 1 Eastern. And of course, we'll be recorded as well. And we'll put that online once we're finished with it. And so other than that, I know that Dan and I will be up at Oshkosh next week. So if you happen to be around, stop by the You Can Fly tent. We'll be there during the week. Dan's there all week. He's hardcore with this stuff. And so hopefully we'll see you there. And otherwise, we'll see you online next time. So appreciate you being here. And thanks for viewing.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Bye-bye.